Hi there. To get from the unenlightened state, which is represented by this triangle, to get to so-called enlightened state, which is represented by this circle down here, with all the question marks, and I'll come to that in a minute. There's a lot of obstacles between top left and bottom right. um, and we'll come on to that in a minute as well. But what are these obstacles? Well, I think there are three categories of them. The first one being, and the most problematic, is these what I call the distortion maze, which are these little circles here. And each one of these circles is what I call a distraction vortex. In other words, it's a distraction that sucks you into it like a vortex, and you get trapped in each of these distractions. Of course, sometimes these distractions knock you from one to the other as well, which is another sort of little thing that happens as well. So even that's not so bad, but you can get right royally trapped in any one of these places. And there are probably as many sources of distraction in this world as there are stars in the universe. There are more HTML pages on the internet than there are people on the planet. And each one of those HTML pages is a potential distraction, which is a jolly good thing. We then spend all our days going through each one of these pages because we know you get nothing done. But obviously we don't. We search. We use search engines to search our way through this mass of information and data that we are surrounded by nowadays through mobile applications, mobile devices, and desktop systems, and intranets as well. So it's one doesn't really stop to think about it because you sort of go mad if you did really. But of course, the other category of obstacle, is that the path that we weave in and out of these distractions, trying to avoid being distracted by them, and very often we also come to a crisis point as well, where we have to change direction in order to find another path, seemingly, through the maze. This complicated way of life, this discipline that we have to adhere to in order to avoid all the distractions, is itself a distraction. And that's the rub, really. The discipline itself can become the distraction. On the path itself, the spiritual path, can be a distraction on one hand, and it can also be a source of spiritual pride on the other, which is the very final hurdle that you have to go over before you get to wherever you're trying to get to, which is called enlightenment, which is these three question marks. And I put question marks here because the problem is that intellectual speculation, of course, feeds into your mind all along the path. And that's a super barrier, which, of course, exists right from the get-go. Anyway, so we've got the path itself, which is a distraction and source of spiritual pride. We've got intellectual speculation, which is a distraction, big one. And then finally, the third category is impure motivations. When I think of my own life, my interest in occultism and magic and New Age stuff and healing and Kabbalah and Gnosticism itself, I have to admit that a lot of it was stimulated by a desire to go against my parents, my community, my society. I'm a child of the 1980s, and the 1980s was a decade of rebellion and revolution, and stroppiness and obnoxiousness on every level, and punkness, I might say. And you just did things. You got interested in esoterica because you wanted to, upset your parents, basically. Which is ironic because my parents are quite liberal, so I'm not quite sure what that was about really, in any way. So I don't think they were very shocked by my ideas as such. They would have been shocked by if I turned any of my ideas into actual behaviours, I think. So I didn't go into the behaviours, but a lot of people did. But of course, if your motivation for going along the spiritual path is revolution, rebellion, and upsetting people, that's a negative. That's an impure motivation. But of course, it's mixed up with the underlying pure motivation, which is to seek God. And to realize that God is closer to you than your jugular vein, on one hand, and that God is the underlying reality of all things, al-Hag, I think it's called, in terms of reality. So you've got at least mixed motivations, if not downright impure motivations. And of course, some people were motivated to join the New Age for money and power. Even though they could have started off by being very idealistic, money and power was at the back of their minds, a sort of cough part. The quixotic part of the mind is about money and power, and religion can be a source of both. So you have your three categories of obstacle here. You have your impure motivations, you have the matrix or the maze of distractions, and you have the path itself, the disciplines which are supposed to get you through the distraction maze, and the path itself becomes an obstacle because of spiritual pride and intellectual speculation. So you wonder how on earth we're going to get through all this. I mean, if all these obstacles are against us, what on earth is going to get us through it all? How are we going to get through it all even? Where's the method? Where's the power? Where's the pure motivation? And this, of course, is where we come sort of beyond Hermeticism, beyond spiritual methodologies, as it were, and modes of spiritual development. We get here on the idea of grace. And grace comes from the Holy Spirit, grace comes from God, grace comes from Jesus and other avatars of light. And grace comes from the Christ consciousness. There's a whole lot of different sources of grace, and from the Holy Grail, and the vision of the Holy Grail is a source of grace as well. And this grace sort of overcomes all the obstacles. It like leapfrogs over all the stuff which is in our way, and the symbol of the frog, which is leaping over the obstacles, leaping over the things that stop us from going from A to B in spiritual terms. And of course, even the concept of going from A to B in spiritual terms, sort of linear concepts, they are also a terrible obstacle as well, because of course it's more like a spiral than it is a linear progression, as it were. Which of course is mind-boggling, especially when you consider it's in 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions or dimensions to the power of n. Then it becomes even worse to understand. So, but anyway, grace sort of cuts through the whole of it, really, because the archetype, the archons, the architect of this cosmos has designed all this. This is we're the rat in the maze. And there's a cheese in the middle of the maze, but the cheese and the maze and the rat's motivation for finding the cheese, all of that has been set out and set down by the architect demiurge God. So the whole thing is Maya, the whole thing is illusion. And so we need grace to cut through the whole of the illusion, not just a part of it, but the whole of it. And I suppose the only way, well, fortunately, there are interfaces between our consciousness as it is trapped in the world of the demiurge and the ineffable realm beyond the demiurge. Fortunately, there are particular interfaces. One of them is grace. One of them is the vision of the Holy Grail, for example, the action of the Holy Spirit, the following of the Messiah, the Gnostic Messiah. There are various interfaces, and these interfaces, I think, one of them is invitation, initiation. So it is as though the Holy Spirit invites you to put the first of your tentative toes on the path itself. And there's initiation, which means to begin, which means that you get a sort of dollop of grace to help you to navigate your way through the maze, and not to not to not to see the navigation itself as an obstacle, and not to get too wound up about it. And then after you've been initiated, you're sent on your merry way. But it isn't all up to you either. There is grace along the way. And you become aware of this grace through spontaneous introspection, which is basically when you don't necessarily sit down every day and contemplate the Holy Spirit, but when you feel the need to, when you feel this longing, this urge of your soul to connect with God and to eventually unite with God, then you go into a quiet place and you sit and just become aware of your breath, and relax your body and do all the do that kind of thing, just a little gentle relaxation, and then just go in and ask the question, where are you? I am here. These just by saying that as a not as a mantra, but just just saying it once, can stimulate a response. And I'm not a gradualist when it comes to methods. I'm a like that. I believe in the click of the fingers, the blink of the eye. I believe that that all these things that are against us, all these obstacles, are ruled over by time. But when you make a decision, when you make a click of the fingers decision, you overcome time because it's an instant, and everything will be our eyes will be opened in an instant. So I believe that that the enlightenment comes very, very quickly. And spontaneously, and you throw everything to the four winds and just go there. It's difficult to really describe any further, but so you don't hang about, and you just make a decision and leap at it like a tiger. At least that's the way I roll anyway. I'm not a gradualist. I'm more like one of these Zen masters that just hits people over the head with a saucepan and they get enlightened. I like that kind of image, that icon, if you like, that Zen icon of not hanging about and not waiting for things to get the better of you, and not waiting for fear to start become a bedfellow of your consciousness, because fear itself, we must fear fear. Because fear is also really what is the basis of all this, because of course the demiurge is full of fear. He doesn't want you to achieve enlightenment because then he can't feed off you. So obviously there's a fear there that the demiurge will lose human consciousness to God. So naturally he projects his fears onto you, because that's the best way to keep you in check, isn't it, really? To give you lots of fear, lots of spiritual pride, lots of intellectualism, lots of confusing images, and of course, when you think basically of meditation, this whole contemplation, by the way, was stimulated by a book about a woman going to an ashram and learning to meditate. And I was just struck by the fact that everything was against her. She's a 35-year-old American, brought up on social media, every kind of distraction, every modernist rubbish, every postmodernist rubbish, every 1980s revolutionary, rebellious rubbish in her poor mind, and she's so confused. And she does have a real bad time of it. Lots of things are problems for her, and her parents and her community and her American culture, American education or lack of education, unfortunately, makes it very, very difficult for her to meditate. And I'm almost thinking, wouldn't it be better just to give up meditation altogether, and just initiate yourself into the grace of God on one hand, and then just wait for spontaneous introspection, or the fruits of spontaneous introspection to occur when they occur, and not to try to navigate your way through this maze of distractions, not even to try to deal with spiritual pride or intellectualism, but just sometimes just give up. Sometimes just sit down under a hedge or under a tree and just say, you know what, I'm just going to sit peaceably here, and I'm not going to worry about distractions and motivations and intellectual pride and intellectualism and all the myriad of distractions in my life and modern life itself, and all the stresses of modernism. I'm just going to sit here peaceably and open myself to grace, basically. Having initiated myself into grace, having asked for grace to be in my life, I'm just going to sit down one day and just some days, and when everything is a little bit less frenetic, and just open myself up to grace. And that could be, or just say a quiet prayer, and believe in the energy of prayer, which overcomes all the rubbish, all the distractions, all the barriers that exist or seem to exist between me and God. And of course, they only seem to exist. But by goodness, they may seem to exist, but they do seem to have a reality which is all pervading, and barriers exist, which you really can't seem to get over. So perhaps you shouldn't try to get over them as well. And we'll cover this point as well in talking about lust of result as well, that you just let go. Okay, so this is my little contemplation on the spiritual path, if indeed there is a spiritual path, and maybe there isn't. Maybe it's just a matter of just receiving grace as a result of the vision of the Holy Grail, as a result of the action of the Holy Spirit. And being open to the various interfaces that actually do exist, that are real between all this and the reality of God himself or itself. And as I say, I see it in personal terms. I see it in terms of the Holy Grail. I don't see it in terms of impersonal energies and universal archetypes. I see it in a personal way. I see the hand coming down from the sky in a real personal way, and I feel my heart opening in a real personal way. And perhaps that's all that we've got, because certainly the obstacles are impure, mixed motivations, all the matrix of distractions, and some of the problems of the path itself, as a path, as a discipline, as it were, are certainly very, very, there's a huge amount against us. There's a huge amount trapping us, imprisoning us in this illusion. And you sometimes wonder what on earth is going to get us through it all. But I think what gets us through it all is very, very fast. It happens like that, on one hand, and it's grace that comes from the spiritual realm. It's that motivates us, or leapfrogs us right over all of this stuff here, all of this mad stuff here, and we can just leapfrog over it and be there. Okay, be there, or be square.